Get started, everyone. We're going to go ahead right away with Dana Gioia's presentation on why literature matters. And as you can tell, Dana is already on the line, and I'm going to turn it over to him. If you have any questions, please post them in the questions box. You can pose those at any time. I'll roll them up and post them to Dana at the end of the session. So I'll just be talking to you then, Dana.
Okay.
Take it away.
Well, good afternoon to everyone. I'm talking to you from my office at USC in Los Angeles, where I arrived yesterday afternoon to discover all of my furniture had been piled up into a great pyramid because they plan to repaint my my office. So I feel like a little, about a 10-year-old kid who has taken all the furniture and built a fort. And in the middle of it, I'm, surrounded by these great walls of boxes and things like that. It's a pleasure to talk to you. What I wanted to discuss today was a topic which I think is central to our profession, to the study of literature, to the teaching of writing, but which is not talked about much, not considered much, and I think to our collective detriment. And what I'm talking about is the impact that studying literature, that learning to read well, and learning to write well has on individuals, on people's lives, both in school and beyond school, and ultimately even has to our collective lives in creating communities and towns and the economy. Now, this is something that I've been thinking about in different ways for a number of years, because I was trained in sort of the traditional way in literature, and a great emphasis on critical theories, on sort of critical analysis of texts, which I'm weird enough to really kind of enjoy that stuff. But at some part of me always felt that was an interesting thing you could do with literature, but it wasn't the primary reason that humanity had created this complicated and rather wonderful series of arts, of poetry, of fiction, of drama, of essays. And I began pondering, and the funny thing is there didn't seem to be much help about this, of what the human purposes of literature were, and then ultimately what was the human impact of literature. I mean, if you took literature out of society, if you took the ability to read and to analyze and understand text, being able to, the ability to express yourself in written language, and then through a series of strange events, I ended up being the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts for 7 of the last 8 years, where we ended up making reading literature one of our major emphases, and which was not part of my plan going in there. What happened was this: the NEA does a survey. Initially, it was every 10 years. I changed it to every 5 years, about all of the arts participation in the United States. This survey is huge. It's the largest thing of its kind in the world, and it's about 20 times as large as your average poll. And so we go in to a cross-section of Americans that perfectly represent the U.S. population in terms of age, diversity, region, income, education, and we look at whether they're going to the theater, whether they're going to museums, whether they're reading, whether they go to concerts. But we also ask them things: do they do volunteer work? Do they vote? Do they exercise? Do they play sports? Do they do all these other things? And it gives us a fairly complete sort of view of how Americans spend their time. And the sample size is so large and so accurate that we can actually correlate these various things. Now, when we did the study, I expected to see, well, this was the theater trend, this was the opera trend, this was the museum trend, this was the crafts fairs trend. But something really interesting emerged, which was rather alarming too, which was there was a dramatic fall off in Americans reading, which is to say adult Americans, 18 and older, in terms of whether they were reading literature, which we had a very liberal definition: any any text of any length, of any kind, that was short story, novel, poetry, theater, in any form. They could read it online, they could read it in a book, they could read it in magazines. And we saw this dramatic drop. It had been, the funny thing is that it had kind of, been, a modest decline with some internal increases. African Americans had been reading more, and so things like this. But suddenly, every group of Americans was reading less. Every age group, every income group, every education group, every racial group, every regional group. And the interesting thing was that when we correlated behavior, now this sounds, I hate to throw statistical language, but I hope you can follow me. We discovered something that was even more alarming than the fact that people weren't reading, and it was this. If you divided the population to people who read and people who don't read, you saw dramatic differences in behavior. The people who read, and this was literary reading, so it was any kind of, but I can make pretty good evidence that actually replicates whether people do reading at all. The people who read not only did better in life, but more interestingly, were more active in their communities. People who read, believe it or not, the numbers are overwhelming. They vote more. They do volunteer and charity work more. They exercise more. They play sports more. They do volunteer work more. And so when I first saw this, I said, well, it's about income. The readers, they make higher incomes, blah, blah, blah. But when we looked at this, we saw even differences in that. The richest group of Americans who don't read, and it's a large group, do less than half as much volunteer and charity work as the poorest group of Americans who do read. And we looked at this thing, and again, we realized that if you were going to take one indicator of all these hundreds of measures we had about people's civic involvement, that reading would be the sign. And what I began to see then, I began to understand that a lot of what we as teachers of English, as writers, believe, which is in some ways if you read a novel, you read poetry, it tends to open up an insight or series of insights about the world that's hard to get otherwise, and that insight, that action, that ability to kind of enter into an imaginative consideration of other people's lives, of other people's stories, actually has an impact on your life. Now, maybe you can't predict the impact, but all this, you think of this, almost like a medieval Jewish notion, that of an enlightenment that happens when you connect to books is actually true. So we then did something, because we began to look around and we realized there was very little data on this. The federal government had done many, many reports, but nobody had ever put them together. And so the NEA, with our staff of only 4 people in research, took every federal study on reading. These range from the Bureau of Prisons to the Department of Defense, Bureau of Labor Statistics, Department of Education, Department of Commerce, and we started compiling the data and comparing it, and something relatively amazing happened. Now, I don't know if you've ever had to take like different databases and try to compare them. They never agree. They just never agree, because people are asking different questions in different ways. The scary thing that we saw was that every one of these studies, and I think it was 42 studies that we did that were large national studies done in a very reliable manner, told us the same thing. And I could give you, 100 things they told us, but I could summarize it in 3 sentences. First, Americans are reading less. Every age group, and in this case we were able to measure all the way down to 6 and 7, all the way, up to 90, and beyond. Every group of Americans is reading less. Every age group, every racial group, every region, every income level, every education level, and it's startling, this kind of universal decline. The second thing was that because Americans are reading less, and this is where it starts to touch on us, they read less well. And if you looked at this, you see drop-offs in reading comprehension that are astonishing. Only about a third of current college graduates now read at a proficiency level. This is, proficiency level is what we used to think of as as a good high school reading level. And so you see this great drop-off in every group. So if they read less, it's not surprising, they read less well. And the third thing that we learned was that reading less and reading less well has measurable economic, academic, civic, and behavioral content, sort of impact. I mean, it's not an opinion. We can actually demonstrate this. And I began to understand then, or I began to understand more fully then, why what it is that we do as English teachers, as writing teachers, as literature teachers, has a profound effect on people's lives. If we see our students succeed, this is something, a gift, an ability, a momentum we give them for the rest of their lives. People who read well do better academically. That's not surprising, I guess. They actually go to higher levels of academic achievement. That's not surprising. They get more advanced degrees, et cetera, et cetera. Secondly, they have very different employment outcomes than people who don't read well. They tend to do better, get more promotions. They tend to make more money. And in fact, when you talk to people who don't read well, who will 20 years later from school say that one of the things that is holding them back in life is their ability to read well. Now, if you go to American companies and you say, well, how do you, tell us about your new employees. This is a Department of Commerce, study. And, you go back 20 years ago, they say, well, these new employees, they don't know how to dress. They don't, they don't cut their hair. They're doing drugs, et cetera, et cetera. There's the problems they're having with their new employees. It's, can't write well, can't read well. These are the top problems. And, to a certain degree, some of them try to train them on the job, but by and large, it's a little too late, and there's too many other things going on for them to train them well. So you start to see these tremendous economic impacts of not reading well, and absolutely devastating ones of not being able to read at a basic level. It used to be that if you couldn't read, you could find some essentially manual labor to do, something like this. Now, the majority of Americans who cannot read at a basic level, can't get at basic or below, are permanently unemployed. The majority of them. It's a startling statistic. And so what happens is these people, at the bottom of this curve, the people that can't master it at all, they tend to drop out of school. They tend to stay permanently unemployed. And in fact, if they drop out of high school as a result of this, they will live 6 to 7 years less than people who complete high school. So it's a public health issue. But finally, you start to see these behavioral differences, and I think this is what you can measure in terms of whether people are reading imaginative literature. They vote more. They do more volunteer work. They coach sports. They play sports. They exercise sports. They tend to get out into the community. And you start to see now in the United States, and this is not an opinion, this is something that's statistically demonstrable. The country is sort of dividing into two groups. It has nothing to do with red states and blue states, conservatives or liberals. It's behavioral. There are those people who basically work, shop, and then go home, where they basically watch TV, do video games, watch DVDs, play on the computer. They're wrapped in electronic entertainment. And then there's the other group. They do everything that the first group does, which is, they watch TV, they play video games, they shop, they do everything else, but they balance that off with, with reading, with volunteering, with arts participation, with exercise, with sports participation, with civic participation, voting, and it becomes scary. If you look at these groups are now equally the same size in the United States. our opportunity, our privilege, our challenge as teachers is to take this next generation of Americans and put them in the camp that is active, that is involved, that is alert, that is curious. And if we can do one thing for them, versus all sorts of other things, the thing that will have the biggest determination of creating that inner awakening, that capacity, be it in economic, civic, or personal, is, to give them the ability to read imaginative literature, and then to express themselves, in writing, and I think also, rather than having a passive sort of relationship to a screen, where everything is on a screen with the background music telling you your moods, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to create the kind of active participation that reading does. And what we've learned, and I'll just maybe end this part of this, if we've learned anything, is that reading is not a passive activity. It is an intensely active enterprise, which requires the use of sustained linear attention, the use of imagination, the summoning of memories to flesh these things out, and ultimately, when you're reading a novel or a poem or a play or a literary essay, to create a kind of empathetic response. So it trains your imagination, it trains your memory, it develops your ability to sustain attention with all the analytical powers that gives you, and even has an emotional element where it increases your empathy for other people. And doing that, it changes your attitude towards your life. You recognize that other people have inner and outer lives as rich and complicated as your own, and that this gives you a kind of insight. And it's sort of interesting. We've just finished putting together a new book called Literature for Life, in which we're trying, for Pearson. And at one point, I just wanted to have something fun in the book, and so I made a list called 50 famous English majors who aren't teachers or novelists, and you look at this thing, and you see, governors, senators, Supreme Court justices, you see astronauts, you see film producers, you see, business leaders, we're all English majors. You even see some actors that you don't really imagine. I never realized before I did the research that Vin Diesel was an English major. Now that was a new one for me. Sigourney Weaver, I could figure that made sense if you think. James Franco is an English major, that made sense. But when I heard that Vin Diesel, was one, that was insight to me. And so, I think what you see is something that was actually proved in a study many years ago when Carnegie Mellon Business School was trying to determine what was the academic preparation that would lead you to greatest success in business. There was a debate. They said, well, will it be economics? Will it be accounting? Will it be engineering? So they did the test, and the results came back that if you wanted to succeed in business, the major that gave you the highest probability of success was the English major. And the people that ran the study said, well, we've obviously designed a defective study, because we got an answer we didn't expect. So they redesigned the test. They did it again, and what came out was an English major. And they just couldn't figure out what to do, so they kind of threw the results out. But I happened to see this test, and I talked to somebody who was involved in it who told me the history of it. And I said it makes a lot of sense, because in business what you're dealing with ultimately is a lot of qualitative issues. The quantitative issues are kind of straightforward. The real hard decisions are qualitative. It's like reading a novel. You have 400 pages of details, and you've got to figure out what is the line that you're going to follow through that. What are the significant things that happens in that welter of detail? How do you make qualitative decisions? How do you recognize the emotional context of things? I mean, would that Mr. Reed, who runs Netflix, had an English background this last month? He might have saved his company from the kind of catastrophes that he's in. And so let me end then by saying what it is that we do, what it is that we try to give our students what it is that is represented, by the whole human imaginative enterprise of writing and reading, of imagination, creativity, reflection, and intelligence that is perpetuated, that is that is preserved in novels, in stories, in poems, in plays, in essays, is a gift of inestimable value to our students, and it is also, it seems to be irreplaceable. If they don't have this, it seems unlikely that most of them, at least, will get it from other means. So I hope I haven't been too long-winded and boring, but let me see if we might have any questions that are occasioned by this.
Well, it usually takes a few minutes, Dana, for questions to kind of start rolling in, but so I'll kind of start. The NEA study seems to suggest, I guess there's a couple of ways to think about how reading generally and reading literature are related, and I wondered if you might say just a little bit more about that. Do you think of, reading in general as kind of almost like a gateway to more literary reading, or do you think that people just reading is?
Well, I think that reading is a series of infinite gateways. You never arrive. You just go from one gate to another, and down, turn this corner and that the other way. I mean, I think reading anything is better than reading nothing. The interesting thing about literary reading, I think, is this: that in if you read an article in the newspaper, it tends to be analytical and slightly clinical. The who, what, where, when, why. Dry description of the facts, not editorializing. What literature does is a tendency to put you inside of another complete human being with their thoughts, their emotions, their physical body, their circumstance, their memories, their imagination, their aspirations. And what this does is I think it alerts you just to the complexity of human existence. And if you think of this, if you think of reading, and this will sound funny perhaps to some people, as a spiritual exercise, that for once a day, you sit down for half an hour or an hour, 15 minutes, and you meditate what it is like in vivid detail to be inside someone else's life. It can be James Bond's life, for God's sakes, or it can be, Emma Bovary or Anna Karenina. But you do this, and it tends to develop, not just your attention span, which is part of it. That's not inconsiderable, but it also just all these capacities of imagination, of reflection, of empathy. It's sort of funny. I have two sons. They're both in college. My youngest one just went to college a few weeks ago, and they were late readers. My wife and I read so much, we were kind of just assumed that they would start reading, but instead they were playing video games and all the things that teenage boys do. I don't have to tell anybody what those things are. So I began sort of working on them, and I finally, and both of them actually had this conversion experience. But at first they would say, "This is boring. It's boring, or I just can't read this." And it was because it was just hard to pay attention. It was hard not to have, the adrenaline feedback that you get from a video game. All the help that you get from a movie. And I just said, well, let's let's do it. And then what happens is suddenly you could see that they developed the capacity. Their attention span just got a little stronger. Their ability to decode language got a little stronger. And then once I gave them the right books, for both of them, Kurt Vonnegut was a big turning point. Once they got Kurt Vonnegut, he was funny and everything like this. But then, they're reading, they just go off. They're reading Hemingway and, Fitzgerald and Nabokov. And hell, my younger one, who's kind of a jock, is reading Borges, and he loves him. But it was get him over that hump, because they had to kind of put more of themselves into the act of reading than they did in the act of watching television or playing a video game. And I think that's part of what it is that the ability to summon more of yourself into your own life, not just drift through your life. There's a lot of my students, sometimes I feel like when they look at me, they're looking at a screen, because they're just used to sort of being detached from the world and watching it on a screen, and the beauty of reading is it gets inside your head. That's its power. It's like music.
Here's a question we have that is kind of related to that. If reading uses more of the brain as an active activity, as over like watching TV, for example, what do you think about reading graphic novels, where the mind is continually trying to absorb both words and pictures?
Well, I'm not. You're talking to a kid, who grew up on Spider-Man and Superman, and Green Lantern, and Fantastic Four. I think comic books are fine, but one wants to without necessarily even giving them up, one wants to move on to more complex things. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius, whom I guess most people now know only from his brief role in the movie Gladiator, was this philosopher emperor of Rome. And he said something that struck me as very, very profound. He says that the path of wisdom is moving from simpler pleasures to more complex pleasures. And as somebody who, I don't know if anybody I'm talking to is old enough to remember classics illustrated comic books, I first read a lot of novels as classics illustrated comic books because they were comic books, and then I ended up going, when I read War of the Worlds and Time Machine, I liked them, and I read H.G. Wells novels on those, and then from H.G. Wells I went on to, more and more writers. So I think anything that we can do that links the young person, or the not so young person, I guess, because a lot of all of us have students now that are returning to school, to an inner life, to an ability to sort of shut the noise of the world off and focus on on the kind of meditation which is literature, even if it's the simpler ones of a graphic novel or a comic book. I think it's not bad. It's not a bad place to begin. But the thing is, but one should always be going through some new doorway, I think.
Dana, a couple of people have asked about finding the resources that, the studies and stuff that you've presented. And I think, I know that I've read the To Read or Not to Read study on the NEA website. Is that a good source of information for people?
The good news is that, it's all available. It's all public access. So if you just go, there was a bunch of reports. I should tell you, there's also, there's a whole bunch of reports that are all online. And in fact, there's other resources online that, that you should know about. So if you just go, just Google, there's two studies. One's called To Read or Not to Read. And the first one's called Reading at Risk.
Okay.
And you can get those, you can download them, and I made sure when I was chairman that we copyrighted nothing. Everything that we did belongs to the American public. So you can Xerox them and give them to your students, give them to your colleagues. It's all perfectly fine, if you go to, and if you're teaching things, we created this program called the Big Read. And if you go to the Big, if you just Google the Big Read, the first thing will come up, Big Read National Endowment for the Arts. You can also get, for 32 books that we did, which range from Ray Bradbury and Harper Lee, through Rudolfo Anaya and Julia Alvarez to Zora Neale Hurston to Emily Dickinson and Edgar Allan Poe, you can get all kinds of great information. You can get the teacher's guides, you can get author's guides, And you can even, get sort of the equivalent of CDs that you could play in your classrooms, which are, writers, critics, in many cases movie stars talking about why these books matter. So there's a lot of interesting resources. And, and I like to mix up stuff, when I'm teaching. Like yesterday, I played them a recording of Robert Frost reading his poems and Ezra Pound reading their poems because we'd studied both of these poets. And I said, was this how you imagined their voices? And it creates a different kind of an excitement if you bring different media into it. But the reports are all online. They're all free. They're all public domain. And you can, you can do with them what you want. There's even been an update that just came out. Now, I should say one more thing. The good news was that once we started creating public concern about this, once we created the Big Read campaign that we had in every state, in every congressional district, every urban center, and many rural centers in the United States, we actually were able to increase the reading for the first time in 3 decades. So the good news is that if we work on this, we can actually change the course of the culture. People that say, well, you can't do anything, it's just terrible, they don't get it. We can create the culture we want to live in if we work hard.
That kind of leads to a question that Susan Grover posted. She wrote, I'm interested in the cause-effect established, or do you intend to set up cause-effect suggestions at all? Between the positive life habits established in the study, is there a direct connection between imagining life potential in reading about others and exercising, or are both reading literature and exercising effects of another cause, such as motivated personalities?
Okay, well, yeah, that's a very smart question. You cannot, in any statistical study, determine with scientific accuracy causality. Is this the sole cause of something? What you can correlate, is just do these things move together? Now, so if you just see these things, there's no you can't really say it's cause and effect. But what I would say is if you take these correlations, reading and exercise, and you begin to go through other correlations, and the correlation which ends up being the highest is reading, then there's something interesting going on. Is it cause and effect, or is there something else? Who can tell? But there's probably a pretty high correlation between spending your nights in a bar and intoxication. And so you look at these things, and when things tend to hang out together, it's quite interesting. That's why when you start to strip away a lot of the income, the age, the racial things, and they don't seem to be the key things, it suggests there's something going on. I think what's going on is what this person has said, which is a kind of higher level of motivation. The question then becomes is how does that become awakened in life? And then many people are very motivated or very aware of things, but they're rather unsuccessful in their ability to do it. We all know people of great talent, of great ambition, who don't seem to be able to get it all together. And so it does seem to me that I would say that there's something that goes on when you develop the habit of daily reading or regular reading, whatever you want to call it, of these kind of that develops, I think, internal capacity which makes you take your life more seriously. And the funny thing is we have thousands of years of folklore that tells us this. There's all of the countless tales, the myths, the religious parables of inner awakening caused by reading. Sometimes it's the corruption. In the Middle Ages, they said, oh my God, you read the wrong book and you turn into a sensualist. But what it's really saying is that there's something about reading that makes us understand things about our own humanity. Now, I'm not saying that reading will make you a better person, because maybe if your inner capacity is to be villainous, it will awaken your capacity for villainy. But it does seem like that it has an ability of awakening, and this is something curiously that the Western and Eastern traditions seem to agree on.
You know, Dana, there are several questions here that are sort of all circulating around this same idea. How do we, you know, we who are already awakened to this, how do we awaken our students? You know, how do we influence or inspire them to see the realness of the need to read?
Well, um, it's the great question, which is how do we become a great teacher? How do we become an effective teacher? And I think the first thing we realize is that, you know, there are many ways to success. I mean, in one of my classes, I've got 99 kids, and they are as different as they could possibly be. They have different life experiences, they have different personalities, they have different sizes, different shapes, different interests. And so, you know, it's a dilemma. I think every teacher experiences this. There's a couple people that are immediately on your wavelength, and you've tuned into each other, and everything is working. There's other people who've just shut the radio off. You know, and I had one guy yesterday, who, explained why he did so badly in the midterm is he was in the criminal court system. And so I brought him over. We started talking about that. I have this is L.A. Now, don't laugh at this. I have 2 kids in my class right now who are famous reality TV stars whose show got canceled. They've come back to college. Their needs are very different. And so I think what you do is you start, in a sense, with yourself. Who are you as a teacher? What are your passions? And you always teach best when you teach from the center of yourself. There's a sense of authenticity, and students know right away whether the teacher is real or phony. And you teach out of that, and then you try to, in a sense, I mean, this is for me. Maybe this is a poet's answer. I try to find something of myself in this kid, and and you go there, and you offer that, because what we teach most from, I think, is we model the behavior that we hope our students will copy, and and you emphasize it differently. So I think you come there, and if you speak with passion, you speak with conviction, you speak with pleasure, you speak with emotion, they'll pick that up. Because the emotion, because it's the mistake I made, I think, when I first started teaching, was that I thought it was all about intellectual things, ideas, methods. If I could organize it clearly and give it to them clearly, they'll understand it. And yes, that really helps. The clearer you are, the better, more organized you are. But at some level, you're teaching equally by imagination, by emotion, by the physicality of your presence. So I don't know. So I think so. All of us have what we need to start with, which is ourselves. Our own loves, our own passions, and we shouldn't be afraid of bringing those things into the class, because I think it's the emotional connection. And then part of it is just listening. So I don't know. I've probably given an answer which may seem confusing, vague, and new agey. But I think it's for me, it's what works. But my tendency, I got to remember not to be so much of an egghead as I can be. And to remember what it's like to be somebody who's got a little bit lost in a class. Some of our students are a little bit lost in their lives. You bring them down. So anyway, but it's interesting. It's interesting. To deal in the same day with 2 reality TV stars and a Hispanic kid who's just barely kept himself out of jail. That's the range of students that we have, and you got to make room for both. There's a phrase in the Bible I love, which is, "Our Father's house has many mansions," and you got to find find the right room for each of these kids.
You talked about being inspired and teaching the things that you love. As a poet yourself, and I know a wide reader, are there any contemporary poets or writers that you're really struck by right now or having good luck with in your classes? Or
Well, there's, I mean, there's people, sometimes what you do is you recommend something that's not part of your class. I mean, somebody mentioned, graphic novels. A writer, I think, who's a lot of fun, and I think kids love, is Neil Gaiman, who started off doing graphic novels and then did novels and short stories and essays and stuff, And, he's, or there's a novel, Ender's Game, by Orson Scott Card. You, guys coming out of adolescence love that book because it's kind of speaks to people that are sort of in a video game world. I mean, I'm always surprised at what people like, because I think they're all going to like something, and they sort of don't. The person, I'm very interested in what teachers think teaches well, and I'm very interested in what students like to read. And so for 20 years now, I've saved every survey we've ever done with students and teachers, and I've just talked to thousands of students and teachers, and this becomes a very important process of me putting things in books or not. And it's interesting, if you look, what is the favorite poem among undergraduates, their favorite poem in the English language, and the favorite poem by teachers in the English language. It's the same author, Robert Frost. And the students pick a different poem than the teachers do. The teachers pick, The Road Not Taken, which is, one of the great poems, obviously, in the English language. And the students, however, pick Fire and Ice. The students like this really dark. It's kind of scary that that's their favorite poem, but Fire and Ice is probably what a kid goes through in adolescence now. I mean, we're in a fairly, fairly strange culture, and so I'm teaching this big class, and the kids love Frost. You know who else they love? And it's surprising because it's not taught very much. E.A. Robinson, Edward Arlington Robinson, Richard Cory, Miniver Cheevy, Mr. Flood's Party. Mr. Flood's Party is a poem about a homeless guy. And it's the funny thing is that 100 years after these poems are written, American society is kind of very much in that place again. So I'm surprised at some of the poems that students like. Stevie Smith is a poem called Not Waving but Drowning. I just put it in the books. I liked it, and within one edition, it became one of the top 10 favorite poems. There's a story that we anthologize a lot. Actually, this fellow's now one of my colleagues here, T.C. Boyle, Greasy Lake. Teenagers have all been to Greasy Lake. It's about kids doing something reckless and it turns really dangerous. They get that. Joyce Carol Oates. Where have you been? Where are you going? Teenage girls, young ladies, have been in scary and yet attractive situations like that. So these are, and so I never put anything in a book that I don't think is good. I just, but I'm very interested in what other people like. And sometimes there'll be something that I didn't quite get for years, and suddenly I realize that it speaks to a certain kind of students. There's a poet is an LA poet that I never put in books for years, Charles Bukowski. And maybe because, whenever I saw Bukowski, he was so drunk and so outrageous, But I realized that, Bukowski gets at certain things in a very direct way that can speak to kids that are not quite ready for Wallace Stevens, or T.S. Eliot, or even Emily Dickinson. So, I've started putting Bukowski, in these books. It's a poem called Dostoevsky, because there's a very famous story in Dostoevsky's life, which is that, he was arrested, for political protest, and he was condemned to death, and he was put against a wall to be executed, and they put him there. The firing squad came, the firing squad aimed, and they fired. And then, the warden says, these are just blanks. The Tsar has pardoned all of you. And you can imagine what these guys, they just thought they were being killed. And so for the rest of Dostoevsky's life, he had not just faced it, he had been killed, at least, in a ritual kind of way. And Bukowski writes about that he's this, drunk, lousy student with horrifying acne, and Dostoevsky was the guy who had given him hope. not a bad message. It kind of, it says, so anyway, I find my own taste changing a lot, because, but I also think, a lot of people now, it's sort of more obvious now than it used to be. But when I was a kid, I grew up, reading science fiction, comic books, adventure things, seeing, monster movies. And when I came into an English department, none of that experience was recognized by my teachers. That was all, stupid stuff, and people, and I've always made sure we have stuff like, Edgar Allan Poe. People, students respond to Poe immediately. They know exactly, that tradition. So I try to mix in, some things like, like that, along with, a book should have, room for both, Edgar Allan Poe and James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. They should all be part of the sort of experience. And our opportunities teachers is to move them from Charles Bukowski, to Emily Dickinson, and have and not by making them dislike Bukowski, not making them look down on Poe, but by broadening and extending their taste in a world that includes both of these things.
I think we have time for just one more short question, and I'm really kind of interested in knowing your thoughts on this.
I should you talk a lot, Amy. I'm sorry. I should be much more terse.
Oh, no, not at all. Susan Grover was wondering about what you think about audiobooks, and I was wondering about that too, with you being a poet and that attention to sound. So where do audiobooks fit in kind of the spectrum of reading?
I think audiobooks are great. I think that there's actually, this morning I was just talking to this older man I know who was a stockbroker in LA, and he was always traveling around, driving around, caught in traffic, and he just listened to Trollope and and Dickens and people like that on tape, and he's that way he was able to actually sort of keep literature alive. What you see statistically about audiobooks is the people who listen to audiobooks are almost all heavy readers. It's not so much getting new people in as giving readers who have lives that don't give them much time to read, a chance to read. My problem with audiobooks is a lot of times if I'm listening to one, I'll get to the place, but I won't want to get out of the car, because I want to go to the end of the chapter, But I'm a terribly addictive reader. I should go into a 12-step program, But I think that they're great. And when we did the big read, we made sure we did a radio show and a CD on every book, because if somebody listens to a program about a book, or people talking about a book, then they want to read the book. People like to read things they hear about. So I think that the whole auditory medium is very powerful. And these kids today, they're listening to to pop music, to hip hop, and things like this, and so they may have in fact developed their auditory command of language far in advance of their ability to read it on a page. So if we can use the auditory as a way of bringing them onto the page, I think that's terrific. But I'm all for audiobooks. I'm all for literary radio. Garrison Keillor has done American poetry a great favor by reading a poem a day on the radio. These things like this NPR show called Selected Shorts, where they read stories on the air, great. Or if you get XM Sirius, radio, they have a whole book station. And I'll often, just, driving, I'll just listen to that, and I'll listen to a chapter of a novel I wouldn't read otherwise, and sometimes I'll say, God, that's a pretty good book. I think I'll go out and buy it. So I'm totally pro audio, but the thing to recognize is that it tends to be, the way it's used right now tends to be more for people who are already readers. It would be great if we could use it as a way of getting new readers. That's what we try to do on the Big Read. I think you can still download all 32 Big Read radio shows on the web. So so if you wanted to to have for podcast or play in your class, you could do that.
Yeah, I think you sent me the CD for Hemingway, and it was great. I need to go and download all of those myself.
And the film, we try to make sure everybody that the Big Read CDs have excerpts from the book. They have people talking about the book, so it goes back and forth. But we'd always try to have the excerpts read by somebody famous. So we have, really, famous, movie stars. But for Hemingway, we used a guy that wasn't that well known, Stephen Lang. But he's the guy that ended up being the villain in Avatar, and now he's got his own TV show. What's it called? Terra Nova. It's a science fiction show. So, and the beauty is that when you play these for kids, they recognize those voices immediately. They go, I know that guy. That's the guy that's on, L.A. Law, or that's the, this is the, this is the person. So, so that's a kind of nice thing because it gives a certain, if somebody that's in the realm of pop success is reading Hemingway or Fitzgerald or Emily Dickinson or whatever, it actually makes them feel like, well, maybe this is more relevant than I thought. Mm-hmm. Any trick that we could use that worked, we used. We were shameless.
I know you have Robert Duvall on the To Kill a Mockingbird audio guide. That's reason enough, right? So for those of you who don't know, that website is NEA, N as in Nancy, EA, Big Read, BIGREAD.org. NEA, Big Read, it's all one word, .org. And as Dana says, you can download you can listen to the audio live, you can download podcasts or download the transcript. There's also reader's guides and teacher's guides on that. It's an amazing website. And this was a great presentation. Dana, thank you so much for joining us today from your fort there at USC.
I know. Hope these boxes don't fall on me.
I know. Be careful. Well, all right. Thank you, Dana. We're going to let you go.
My pleasure, and thanks to everyone for putting up with me.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
no. It was a pleasure. Thank you.